borrowed this phrase partly from the left, partly from the American concept of self-determination, and they equated to secession. And the Sinhala nationalists, extremists also, like to call it self-determination secession because it suits both purposes. It rather sees self-determination as a move to divide the country. So they want to divide the country, therefore we have to oppose it. And they say, well, we have to divide the country and therefore we want self-determination. So now self-determination, the purpose of self-determination itself is defeated by both these parties. So now here is a very important role for us to play, to explain to the people that self-determination is not about secession, it's actually about preventing secession.
And you generally dislike the formulation of internal self-determination. That has been just a...
Internal self-determination is a wishy-washy move which was introduced in the United Nations because earlier self-determination was against colonial rule. So at that time there was no ambiguity because all countries under colonial rule wanted to be free of colonial rule. Now the problem of national oppression in the post-colonial era had taken a different dimension. Now all these countries, particularly the majorities or the economic or political or popular majorities who are in control of the situation, they don't want to share their powers and rights with minorities whom they seek to oppress. So now they have introduced this concept of internal self-determination. Internal self-determination is nothing more than a certain degree of autonomy and nothing more. So internal self-determination is self-determination without the right to secession. So now Lenin said that you can't have self-determination without the right to secession. So
it's a contradiction.
So no, this is basically all these countries which liberated themselves from colonialism, now having become the majority in the United Nations, they want to protect their backs by saying internal self-determination. So self-determination will become internal when you address the problems of the people. But you can't sort of call it internal self-determination is not self-determination, no.
Professor, also this question of territory has become a very controversial issue. This question of homelands also. How do you weave the argument made for the Tamil homeland? Because you've written specifically that the Tamil people's liberation struggle has no historical continuity with the Jaffna kingdom. The justification and the cause of this struggle emerge out of contemporary politics. Could you explain that?
Well, territory is something which has varied with time. So people have lived in various parts of the country and so on, and invariably, I think Dr. Indrapala's book explains very well how Tamil and Sinhalese territory became segregated in some stage. But mixed populations have lived everywhere. Territory was never a serious problem until the post-independence year. Now, the Jaffna kingdom is a very historically recent phenomenon. I'm talking about in terms of a few centuries. It didn't last very long either, and it did not include the eastern provinces or much of the Vanni. But it was a powerful kingdom in the north. And the people who brought an end to the Jaffna kingdom were not the Sinhalese. No Sinhalese king brought an end to the Jaffna kingdom. It was the Portuguese who brought it to an end. So, it was not a Sinhala-Tamil conflict which brought the Jaffna kingdom to an end. And again, the Sinhalese, it was not one Sinhalese country, or there had been various kingdoms at different times, and there are occasions when the single ruler wielded control over the whole country. But it was not as a Sinhalese nation or a Sinhalese kingdom or anything like that. It so happened that the identity of the vast majority of the population, and more than the language, the religions of the kings were Buddhism. But again, there have been variations. So territory had been shifting between various kingdoms. And The territory became a specific issue when planned colonization was brought in to make people a minority in their own territories, to break up the contiguity of territories. So in the north and east, essentially there has been a predominantly Tamil-speaking population, Tamils as well as Muslims, now two different nationalities. So when there's a natural development like Colombo becoming cosmopolitan, Trincomalee was a cosmopolitan place there. If Trincomalee was developed as an urban center and as a major harbor and a business center, Trincomalee would have been cosmopolitan. It would have been like Colombo. Now, people don't object. Now, I'm from Trincomalee, and I knew Sinhalese, Muslims, Burghers, all the nationalities in the country and all the religions in the country in my own school. So it was not an issue. It was only in the 70s that this colonization became a very big issue. Earlier it had started, but now the new settlers became very aggressive, and also the armed forces were playing a role, and there was planned operation and various things. So it is not so much about people not wanting others in their territory. In fact, although there had been some violence against the Sinhalese during the 1958 riots, the Sinhalese went back to Jaffna. It was much later that when it became an all-island phenomenon, and especially after violence in the south made it difficult for people to live in the south, the whole thing became sentimental. And so it's not a matter of excluding people, but willingly changing the identity of a territory is offensive. So it's a matter of respecting a territorial identity of a people, but that does not mean that you have to say, well, this is exclusively for one community or the other. Any kind of natural development. Now, you can't have development in the north and east without business going from the south. Can they say a Sinhalese businessman cannot come there? Or if there are Tamil businessmen with money to invest. Now, if he goes into less developed areas in Anuradhapura or further south, can you say you can't come? This will naturally come, people will welcome them. So it's a mechanism of changing the identity which matters, but you can go further. Bangalore is the most cosmopolitan part of India, but in Bangalore also there is Kannada nationalism. If you take Chennai, it's a highly cosmopolitan place now, but still there is Tamil nationalism there. So territory becomes important only when there is intrusion and
Dr. Sivasegaram, how would you assess Tamil nationalist politics today? Because you have over the years critiqued the Tamil Federal Party and so on. How do you see the politics of groups such as TNA and TNPF, for example?
No, it has been elite politics right from the beginning. Now, there have been people who have been very secular, and I think some of the first people to think in terms of Ceylon as a nation, Sir P. Arunachalam. I think he was one of the pioneers. He thought in terms of Ceylon and Ceylonese. And it was rivalry for position which started this issue about representation under the British and so on. But then the Tamil nationalism actually took form in response to Sinhala nationalism itself growing in the south. So you can't say they started it, and it was in this rivalry. You can't say, put your finger on and say this is the person who started it. But once this thing find expression, everybody starts thinking in those terms, especially the elite classes. So G.G. Ponnambalam took one approach. It didn't work, and the Federal Party, they talks about federalism. But when they talked about federalism, they were not talking, although they talked about Tamil-speaking people. The federal state that they were talking about was only north and east, although the party was formed on the basis of disenfranchisement of the plantation workers. So their federalism had nothing to do with them. So they want citizenship for them, but there is no federal state for them. They didn't talk about the Muslims because the Muslims are scattered all over the country. So it was again talking about the Tamil elite interests, but of course the Federal Party was a bit more populist. It included the Tamil middle classes. So it didn't think things through deeply, and also the attitude was that the Tamils alone can fight and achieve this. Now the left at that time was very sympathetic to the Tamil cause, and they were very supportive, although they didn't support federalism per se. They were actually, the Communist Party accepted Tamils as a nationality, and they talked about some degree of autonomy, regional autonomy. So when Bandaranaike proposed district councils, there was support from the left. So the Federal Party never capitalized on this. They saw the left as rivals, and they never saw the need to convince a sizable section of the Sinhalese that there was something fair about what they were asking. So whatever the Federal Party said was seen as something hostile from the South. So this had to be corrected, but except for very short periods, no attempts are seriously made to reach out to the Sinhalese. I'm not saying that everybody will accept your point of view, but you have to make an effort, which it never happened. And now what happens, having failed, now from the mid-70s, they have been counting on India, particularly after Bangladesh. Then when India let them down, now they are looking to the West. So the amount of time that they are wasting, all the rival parties, without exception, they are all talking about getting foreign international intervention to solve the problem. And this aggravates the problem. They don't even, they're very insensitive to how the Sinhalese person would feel when calling on foreigners to solve what they see as an internal problem. So it is this insensitivity which has caused a very big problem. And the other thing is that they don't address the problems of the public. In fact, they don't address the problems of the fishermen. They don't address the problems of the Sampur lands. Now India is going to take over the land. Now even the problem of fresh water in Jaffna wells, they were not interested. Now there's a caste problem. They're only interested in saying, if you talk about these issues like caste, class, gender, they say you're trying to divide the Tamil community. So this kind of Tamil nationalism has to give way to a slightly more progressive kind of Tamil nationalism, which will be more inclusive, which will not see the Sinhalese as enemies. It will talk for the rights of Tamils, while at the same time respect the rights of other nationalities.
In your critique, you've also talked about the diaspora, and you said that they are the diaspora, and you said that they are under certain illusions. What are they?
No, the diaspora is very sentimental. Now these are people who were driven out of this country willingly or unwillingly. So they are not out of touch with the reality. That's an unfortunate thing. And much of the population is more concerned with their livelihood issues. So they don't have much time to understand these things. So there is a certain section of the diaspora which is basically speaking on behalf. So these people have not freed themselves from some of the ideas that they had when they left the country. So many of them think in terms of Tamilam, which I think is losing a little bit, but still there are a lot of people who think in those terms. And there is a large number of these elite population who think in terms of getting the elite to intervene. And there are some useful indicators now, but I don't know.